Hi guys, welcome to this channel. Today we're going to talk about the most famous killer in the history that was never identified. Jack the Ripper. In the autumn of 1888, in the fog-choked streets of London's East End, a killer began stalking women in the shadows of Whitechapel. Over the course of a few terrifying months, he would become the most infamous unidentified murderer in history. A name whispered in fear then, and still recognized by nearly everyone today, Jack the Ripper. More than a century later, despite thousands of pages of police files, hundreds of suspects, and generations of investigators and amateur historians, his true identity has never been confirmed. This is the story of the case that started it all. The original cold case that helped shape how the world thinks about serial murder. Let's begin with what we actually know. Whitechapel in 1888 was one of the poorest districts in London. Overcrowded, impoverished, and plagued by crime. It was in this setting, between August and November of that year, that a series of murders occurred that would later be tied together as the work of a single killer. Officially, police attributed 5 murders to what became known as the Canonical Five: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. All 5 were women. Several were known to work in the area's informal economy of survival, including sex work, which was tragically common among impoverished women in Whitechapel at the time. Each victim was found with her throat cut, and several of the bodies showed further mutilation performed after death. Injuries that led investigators and medical examiners to believe the killer had some degree of anatomical knowledge, or at least confidence and familiarity with a blade. The attacks escalated in severity as the months went on, culminating in the murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November 1888, which took place indoors, unlike the others, and was by far the most severe. The killings were not just brutal. They were bold. Several took place in narrow alleys and courtyards just steps from residential buildings, sometimes with people nearby who heard nothing. The killers seemed to strike quickly and vanish into the maze of Whitechapel streets before anyone could raise an alarm. Now, the timeline of the investigation itself. 2 separate police forces were involved: the Metropolitan Police, who had jurisdiction over most of Whitechapel, and the City of London Police, who became involved after Catherine Eddowes was found just inside the City of London's boundary. This overlapping jurisdiction, and the friction between the 2 departments, has often been cited as one of the contributing factors that hampered the investigation. As panic spread through the East End, local residents formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, patrolling the streets themselves at night in an effort to catch the killer or simply protect their neighbors. Newspapers covered the murders obsessively, and the intense press coverage is part of why the case became so infamous. This was one of the first crime stories to become a true media sensation, complete with public panic and endless speculation. During the investigation, police and newspapers received hundreds of letters claiming to be from the killer. Most were later dismissed as hoaxes, but 3 in particular became central to the case's legend. The "Dear Boss" letter, which is widely believed to be where the name Jack the Ripper originated, the Saucy Jackie postcard, and the "From Hell" letter, which was sent along with part of a preserved human kidney and claimed to have come from one of the victims. To this day, historians and forensic experts disagree about whether any of these letters were genuinely written by the killer or were fabricated by journalists or opportunists looking to fuel the frenzy. Despite an enormous investigation, including house-to-house searches, interviews with hundreds of witnesses, and the examination of countless tips, no one was ever arrested and charged. The murders that are formally attributed to the Ripper stopped after Mary Kelly's death in November 1888, though police at the time and historians since have debated whether earlier or later killings in the area might also be connected. This is where the case shifts from established fact into the realm of theory. And it's important to draw a clear line here, because over the past century dozens of suspects have been proposed, most without solid evidence. Among the suspects taken seriously by investigators at the time was Montague Druitt, a barrister whose body was found in the Thames weeks after the murders stopped. Some police officials later named him as a leading suspect, though the connection was largely circumstantial. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant living in Whitechapel who was known to police and was eventually committed to an asylum, was also named by at least one senior investigator as a strong suspect, based largely on his residence in the area and behavior consistent with mental illness, though at the time there was no physical evidence tying him to the crimes. Other named suspects over the decades have included Severin Klasowski, a poisoner later convicted of murdering his wives under a different alias, and Francis Tumulty, an American con man with a documented hatred of women. Even members of the British royal family have been floated as suspects in more sensational theories, including Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence, a theory that has been widely dismissed by historians due to a lack of credible evidence and provable alibis. In more recent years, some authors and researchers have proposed forensic breakthroughs. In 2014, a businessman and self-described Ripper historian named Russell Edwards published a book claiming that DNA testing on a shawl said to have been found near Catherine Edow's body linked the crimes to Aaron Kosminski. This claim received significant media attention, but it has also been heavily criticized by scientists and historians, who point to serious concerns about the shawl's chain of custody, its uncertain link to the crime scene, and questions about the reliability of the DNA analysis itself. As of today, this theory remains disputed, not proven, within the historical and forensic community. So where does that leave us? Officially, the case remains unsolved. No suspect was ever charged, tried, or convicted. The original police files, many of which have since been made public, reflect an investigation that pursued numerous leads without ever reaching a definitive conclusion. Modern criminal profilers have attempted retrospective analyses of the killer's likely psychology and behavior, but these remain interpretive exercises rather than confirmed findings. What has endured, far beyond the 5 confirmed victims and the streets of Victorian Whitechapel, is the cultural shadow the case has cast. Jack the Ripper became a kind of template the archetype of the elusive serial killer, the shadowy figure who exploits chaos and anonymity to escape justice. The case influenced how police departments would later approach serial crime investigations, and it fed directly into the public's enduring fascination with the psychology of killers who are never caught. But it's worth pausing on something the mythology often glosses over. 5 women lost their lives in horrific circumstances, in one of the poorest, most neglected corners of a wealthy empire's capital city. Their deaths became legend, their names sometimes reduced to footnotes beneath the killer's invented nickname. Mary Ann, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane were real people, living difficult lives in a city that offered them little protection and, in the end, no justice. More than 135 years later, Jack the Ripper remains nameless, a mystery frozen in fog and gaslight, endlessly theorized about but never definitively solved. And perhaps that unresolved silence is exactly why the case still holds our attention, not because the killer was uniquely brilliant, but because the truth, whatever it was, disappeared into the same darkness the victims did.